Guys, in this tutorial video I'm going to talk about proportions. Okay, well, proportions is when two ratios or fractions are equivalent. Okay, and so in order to understand how two fractions can be equivalent, I'm going to start with the model, and I'm going to use a basic benchmark fractions that you guys are familiar with. So I'm going to use 1/2. Okay, so my benchmark fraction is 1/2. Well, if I take my model and let's say I make it into fourths, I can say that 1/2 is equivalent to 2/4. And the reason why is I still have half of the model shaded when I have 2/4 of a fraction. Okay. Well, this right here is called a proportion, and it's called a proportion because both fractions are equivalent. And there's several different ways that you can check whether or not two fractions or ratios are equivalent. And I know this one's a real easy example, but this easy example should help you with even bigger numbers that you're using to compare. So one of the ways that you can check whether or not a proportion is equivalent is you can use the inner relationship. So for example, how do I get from here to here? Well, if you notice, what I did in my model is I took my 1/2 and basically I made more pieces out of it. So to get from 1 to 2, each piece I multiplied it by 2 and made 2 pieces out of each of my pieces. So I did the same thing with my denominator, and you will see that 1 times 2 gives me 2, and 2 times 2 gives me 4. Since this relationship is the same with both the numerator and denominator, then that means that this proportion is equivalent, or that the two fractions are equivalent. Another way you can check is using the outer relationship. Okay, well, if I have 1 on the numerator, in order to get to my denominator, again, it was the same relationship. You doubled it. And I'm going to do the same thing on the other side. And again, 1 times 2 gives me 2. 2 times 2 gives me 4. And you could even go backwards. If we were to go backwards the other way, it would not be multiplication, but you would be dividing by 2 to get to 1, or dividing 4 by 2 to get to 2. So either way, the relationship would make both of these fractions equivalent. And now the last way to check if they're equivalent, sometimes it's easier to use when you have more complicated numbers where you can't find the inner or the outer relationship. And that is cross multiplication. And you always want to check first whether one of these relationships will work, because it's probably going to give you the least amount of work. The other way to check, and I'm going to rewrite it over here, is to do cross multiplication. Sorry, that shouldn't be there. Okay. And so what you're going to do is you're going to do the cross products to check if they're equivalent. So when I multiply these two, I get 4. And when I multiply 4 times 1, I get 4. And you can check that both numbers are the same, and therefore these two fractions are equivalent. Now, sometimes if you have, let's say, a variable here and that was x, if you were trying to figure out this missing number, then you could also use this relationship to figure out what that number is. So if you knew that this was 4, then 1 times whatever number was here has to equal 4, then you would know that that number has to be 4. And same thing would be with these relationships. If this number was missing, and let's say I had an X in there, then you would know that, oh, 1 times 2 is 2, so 2 times 2, this number has to be 4, or vice versa using the other relationship. So this is how you can check whether or not you have a proportion and two fractions are equivalent. So this concludes our tutorial video.